Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. I'm Ryan, your host, and today we're diving into something super practical: how to learn anything faster. Now, we all have those moments where we're staring at a new skill or trying to learn something completely out of our comfort zone, and it just feels slow, right? Whether it's picking up a language, trying to master a new hobby, or even getting through that huge stack of books you've been meaning to read for months, the idea of doing it quickly can feel impossible. But here's the good news. There are ways to speed up the process and make it a lot more effective. Now, to help us out with this, I've brought on a good friend of mine, Lisa. Lisa isn't just a productivity coach, she's an expert when it comes to learning techniques. She's cracked the code on how to pick up new skills in record time, and I think you're all going to get a lot out of what she's got to say. So Lisa, thanks for joining me today.
Hey Ryan, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here because, honestly, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. So many people get overwhelmed by the idea of learning something new, and I totally get it. I've been there myself. People often think it's going to take months or even years to get good at something, and they end up feeling stuck or like they're not making progress fast enough. But the thing is, with the right strategies and a little bit of a mindset shift, you can actually learn a lot faster than you think. It's all about knowing how to learn, not just what to learn. And once you've got that figured out, it really changes the game.
Yeah, I think that's something everyone listening can relate to, feeling like you're putting in so much effort, but the results aren't coming as quickly as you'd hoped. And the idea that you don't necessarily have to spend hours every day to get good at something, that's a big relief, right? Today, we're going to break down some really actionable strategies to help our listeners learn more efficiently. We're talking about everything from focusing on the most important 20% of the material, so you're not wasting time on things that don't really matter, to using active learning techniques, like teaching yourself and testing what you know along the way. Plus, we'll touch on how to stay motivated, because let's face it, that's a huge part of sticking with it when learning gets tough.
Absolutely. Staying motivated is key, and I think a lot of people lose steam when they don't see immediate results. But with the right techniques in place, it's easier to stay on track because you do start seeing progress faster. Today's tips are super practical and easy to start using right away. Whether you're learning a language, trying to master a new skill, or just want to get better at something for work or personal growth. So, I'm excited to dive in and help everyone out there start learning smarter, not harder.
All right, so before we get into the actual techniques, Lisa, let's start with something important that you touched on earlier. Why do people think learning something new takes forever? I feel like so many of us are conditioned to believe that mastering a skill or learning something in-depth takes months, if not years. We've all been in that position where we think this is going to take forever. So, why do you think people have that mindset?
Yeah, it's such a common belief, and it usually stems from the way we were taught in school. Think about it. Most of our education was based on long periods of passive learning, right? We sat through lectures, we read textbooks, and then we crammed for tests. The process was slow and, let's be honest, not always the most engaging. So, we've kind of been trained to think that learning is this slow, linear process. But the truth is, the brain is way more adaptable and efficient than we give it credit for. When you use the right methods, you can tap into that efficiency. And suddenly learning isn't about slogging through hours of repetition. It's about engaging your brain in a smarter way.
That's such a great point. I mean, I remember being in school, trying to memorize a ton of facts the night before a test, only to forget most of it right after. It felt like such a waste of time. But what you're saying is, we don't have to rely on those old school methods. Instead of hours of grinding, there are ways to, I guess, almost hack the way we learn and make it much faster, right?
Exactly. And I think that's where the big shift happens. When people realize that learning doesn't have to be painful and drawn out. When you're using strategies like active learning or focusing on the most important material, you're not just putting information in your brain, you're actually training your brain to retrieve that information faster. It's like you're building stronger connections, so you can recall what you've learned more easily. Plus, When you see that progress happening faster, it's so much more motivating. It makes you want to keep going because you can actually feel yourself getting better.
Right, it's that feedback loop. The faster you see results, the more motivated you are to keep learning, and it just keeps building from there. It's interesting because a lot of people think learning is about putting in endless hours, but in reality, it's about maximizing the effectiveness of the time you do spend. It's not necessarily about working harder, it's about working smarter, which is what we're going to get into today with the techniques you'll be sharing. So, let's dive into those.
Exactly. And trust me, once you start applying these methods, you'll be amazed at how much faster you can pick things up. It's really about tapping into the brain's natural strengths and using techniques that make it easier to absorb and retain information, rather than just passively consuming it. The shift from passive to active learning makes all the difference. And once people experience that for themselves, it completely changes how they approach learning anything new.
All right, now that we've got the mindset sorted, let's get into the real meat of this episode. How do we actually learn faster? I know you've got some powerful strategies up your sleeve, Lisa, so let's start with one that I know a lot of people have heard of, the 80-20 rule, or the Pareto principle. This idea that 20% of your efforts can give you 80% of the results. How does that apply to learning?
The 80-20 rule is probably one of the most useful shortcuts when it comes to learning. The idea here is that when you focus on the most important 20% of what you're trying to learn, you'll get 80% of the benefits. Let's say you're learning a new language. There are thousands of words, but most conversations happen using just a few hundred of them. Instead of trying to learn everything, focus on those key phrases or words that come up again and again. You'll be conversational so much faster, and that progress will motivate you to keep going.
That makes so much sense. I think a lot of people, myself included, feel overwhelmed because they're trying to learn everything at once. Like when I tried learning the guitar a while back, I was all over the place, jumping between different songs and techniques. But if I'd just focused on learning the basic chords and strumming patterns, the 20% that shows up in most songs, I probably would have improved a lot quicker.
Exactly. And it's the same with any skill, whether you're learning a language, playing an instrument, or even trying to get better at something like public speaking. Start by identifying that core 20% and make it your priority. You can always build on the details later, but if you master the essentials first, you're going to see progress fast. The other 80% can come later, but it won't feel as overwhelming because you've already built a strong foundation.
Yeah, and what's great about that is it's not just about saving time, it's about building confidence. When you see yourself improving quickly, you're more likely to stick with it because you feel like you're actually getting somewhere. But I know there's another technique you swear by, and that's active learning. This one's a little different from how most people are used to learning, right?
Absolutely. Active learning is a total game changer, especially if you've been stuck in the cycle of passive learning, like just reading or watching videos without really engaging with the material. The key with active learning is to actively involve your brain in the process. One of the best ways to do that is by teaching what you've learned. When you explain a concept to someone else, or even just to yourself, you're forcing your brain to organize the information in a way that makes sense. It makes you really think about it and process it on a deeper level.
Yeah, I've tried that before, and it really works. I remember when I was trying to learn some coding basics, I found that if I explained what I was doing to a friend, even though they had no idea what I was talking about, it helped me understand the material way better. It's like, when you have to teach something, you realize where the gaps in your understanding are.
Exactly. And that's why it's so powerful. It forces you to not just skim the surface, but to really understand the topic. Another form of active learning is testing yourself. Instead of just reviewing your notes over and over again, ask yourself questions about what you're learning and see if you can answer without looking at your notes. It's called active recall, and it's been proven to strengthen memory. The more your brain works to retrieve information, the stronger those memory pathways become.
That's so interesting. So instead of just reading through the material, you're saying I should be testing myself, quizzing myself even if I don't feel 100% ready? I guess that would force me to engage more with the material rather than just passively consuming it.
Exactly. You don't need to wait until you feel ready to test yourself. That's the point. By doing these mini self-quizzes, even if you get things wrong, you're still strengthening your brain's ability to recall information later on. And when you combine this with spaced repetition, which is reviewing the material at specific intervals, you're going to see a big improvement in how much you retain long-term.
Yeah, I've heard about spaced repetition, but I've never really used it. How does it work exactly? Is it like reviewing the same material over and over, or is there more to it?
Spaced repetition is about reviewing information at increasingly longer intervals, rather than cramming everything into one session. So, for example, if you learn something today, you review it tomorrow, then again a few days later, and again after a week, then maybe after 2 weeks. The idea is to catch yourself before you forget, but also give your brain time to absorb the information and strengthen those neural connections. It's way more effective than cramming because it reinforces what you've learned over a longer period of time.
That makes a lot of sense. I can definitely see how that would help solidify what you're learning rather than just trying to jam everything in at once. I think a lot of us get caught up in the idea of cramming because it feels productive, but then we end up forgetting most of it after a few days.
Exactly. Cramming gives you that short-term feeling of accomplishment, but it doesn't do much for long-term retention. If you space things out and actively engage with the material, you're actually going to retain more over time, and with less stress. Plus, it keeps the learning process much more manageable. You don't have to spend hours reviewing. Just a few minutes here and there can make a huge difference.
All right, Lisa, we've covered some amazing strategies to learn faster, focusing on the 20%, active learning, and spaced repetition. But here's the thing. Learning something new isn't always smooth sailing. I think one of the biggest challenges people face, myself included, is staying motivated when it feels like progress is slow or when you hit those inevitable roadblocks. So, let's talk about that. How can people stay motivated and push through when learning starts to feel tough?
Yeah, that's a really important part of the process because, let's be honest, no matter how effective your learning strategy is, there are going to be times when it feels like you're not making any progress. The key here is breaking things down into smaller, more manageable goals. So instead of looking at this huge end goal, like, I want to become fluent in Spanish, or I want to be able to play this difficult song on the guitar, focus on small, achievable steps. Maybe your goal for the week is just to master 10 new vocabulary words, or learn the first 30 seconds of that song. When you hit these small milestones, you feel a sense of accomplishment, and that keeps you moving forward.
Yeah, I love that idea of breaking it down. I think when the goal feels too big, it's easy to get discouraged because you don't see immediate progress. But if you celebrate those small wins along the way, it's like giving yourself little boosts of motivation. And those add up. I've done this before when learning new things, just breaking it down day by day instead of thinking about how much I still have left to learn. Do you have any personal examples of how this has worked for you?
Definitely. One thing that really stands out for me is when I was learning to code. I remember feeling completely overwhelmed at the start. There were so many languages, so many tools, and I didn't know where to begin. So I started small. I focused on learning just one basic concept, variables in Python, and made that my goal for the week. Once I had that down, I felt so much more confident to tackle the next step. And here's the thing. Once you start seeing those small wins, it creates momentum. It's like a snowball effect, where each small achievement pushes you closer to your bigger goal. Before I knew it, I was building small projects and actually enjoying the process.
That's awesome. It's true, those small wins definitely build up over time. Another thing I've found super helpful when motivation starts to slip is having some form of accountability. Whether it's telling a friend what you're working on or joining a community, just having someone who checks in with you can make a huge difference. What do you think about accountability when it comes to staying on track?
I couldn't agree more. Accountability is one of the most powerful tools to keep yourself moving forward, especially when motivation dips. When you have someone, Whether it's a friend, a coach, or even an online community who's asking how you're doing, it makes it a lot harder to quit. You don't want to let them down, but more importantly, you don't want to let yourself down. I actually started doing this with a language learning group a while back. We would check in weekly with our progress, and it was such a game changer. Even on the weeks when I felt like I hadn't made much progress, just talking about what I was struggling with gave me the push to keep going. Plus, you get to share your wins with people who understand the journey, which is really motivating.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced that too. Even just having someone casually ask, "Hey, how's that project coming along?" lights a fire under me to make sure I've actually done something. It's such a simple concept, but it works wonders. And speaking of accountability, I think it ties into something else that's key: staying flexible. What do you think about the idea of mixing things up when the usual routine starts to feel stale?
That's a great point. And it's super important to keep things interesting, especially when you hit that plateau. If you've been doing the same thing for a while and it starts to feel repetitive, that's when you need to switch gears. Try a new method or a different learning environment. For example, if you've been studying at home every day, maybe take your work to a cafe or a park for a change of scenery. Or if you're learning something like a language, instead of just using an app, try watching a TV show or listening to music in that language. It's all about keeping your brain engaged and excited. When learning starts to feel more like a chore, it's time to shake things up.
Yeah, totally. That fresh perspective or even just a change in setting can make a big difference. I think what we're really getting at here is that learning isn't just about the techniques. It's also about how you stay engaged and how you make it enjoyable for yourself. If it's fun, or at least rewarding, you're way more likely to stick with it.
Exactly. At the end of the day, learning should feel fulfilling. It's not always going to be easy, but if you can stay flexible, celebrate small wins, and have people supporting you along the way, it becomes a journey that you actually want to continue. And that's when you start seeing the biggest progress.
Lisa, this has been so helpful. I think a lot of people are going to feel a lot more motivated and better equipped to learn faster, especially with the strategies we've covered today. Just to recap for everyone listening, focus on the 20% that really matters, use active learning techniques like teaching and testing yourself, and don't forget about spaced repetition to reinforce what you've learned. And of course, when things get tough, break it down, stay accountable, and keep it interesting.
Absolutely. It's all about learning smarter, not harder. I hope everyone takes away at least one strategy they can start using right away. Even small changes in how you approach learning can lead to massive improvements in how quickly you pick up new skills.
Thanks again for joining us, Lisa. This has been awesome. And for everyone listening, if you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave us a review. We'd love to hear what you're working on and how these tips are helping you. Catch you all next time.